Hello and welcome to the Altair podcasting channel. Today we are joined by Spencer Hill, Director of Commercial Services, and his team members Andrea Georgievich and Rebecca Howe. They're here to talk about the importance of commercial thinking and why commercial and procurement strategies are so vital in today's social housing world. So, what is commercial thinking?
So I typed it into ChatGPT because why not? I'm modern and AI is the future. So I thought it'd be really interesting to see what AI thinks commercial thinking is before we humans take it back and start talking about it. It says commercial thinking refers to the mindset and approach that integrates business principles and strategies into the operations of an organisation, whether it's public or private sector. It involves considering financial viability, market dynamics, and customer needs when making decisions. Commercial thinking emphasises maximising revenue, managing costs, creating value for stakeholders, and it enables adopting entrepreneurial attitudes such as innovation, risk assessment, and adaptability to achieve sustainable growth. In the public sector, commercial thinking seeks to balance economic considerations with the provision of public services, promoting efficiency, effective resource allocation, and strategic partnerships. It aims to enhance the overall performance and sustainability of organisations in an increasingly competitive and dynamic environment. Now, that's pretty impressive for a 30-second think from a computer and quite wordy, but I think that's a good start in terms of what commercial thinking is, albeit a bit academic.
I think adding on to what you were saying, Spencer, something quite interesting that I found is when I first joined the commercial team, I didn't really, coming from a social housing background and thinking about the social purpose of housing and really why we do what we do within the sector, I really struggled with this idea of commercial thinking and really grappled with whether I thought it was quite paradoxical or whether it was even relevant. And I think that comes down from this idea that I always used to think about commercial thinking around profitability. And when I was at university, I was thinking about the commercialisation of housing and how it's such an awful thing to me about the unaffordability of housing and the lack of supply of housing that we had. And from that angle, I always thought of commercial thinking as kind of the enemy within this situation. But really, since joining the stream and working closely with social housing providers and with the commercial experts in the room, I have really understood that actually commercial thinking is more of a toolkit, and it's about those ideas that you were saying, Spencer, about how it applies to your organisation, but thinking more critically about what it is that commercial really means.
Thanks, Rebecca. That's a really good insight, especially having worked within the housing sector and understanding how commercial thinking is being perceived. But I think having worked in public sector for such a long time now, that commercial thinking is becoming the norm. It is becoming the way to think and a new practice rather than the old style of the old way of public sector. I'd like to just touch back on something that Spencer mentioned. Having the stakeholders and gaining that knowledge and expertise and everybody within the business that has some impact on your outcome that you're looking for can bring that knowledge to the commercial thinking strategy and to every other strategy that you've got, rather than working in silos. And then that's when your commercial thinking will break down, because it is just a single-minded way of thinking. And it's getting everybody involved and sharing that knowledge so that you can actually then create your strategy and really think open and really get your commercial thinking brain active.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the thing that goes back to what Rebecca said as well, and you think about, we've all been in public sector for a long time, either on the inside or we've worked with clients for many, many years, is commercial thinking needs to stop being a dirty word or a dirty term, and people need to get around the fact that commercial thinking is not necessarily linked to some sort of evil capitalism. Profit is not something that public sector organisations can actually engage with anyway, so the majority of them. So you can't link commercial thinking to profit or capitalism and therefore it's evil, therefore we shouldn't be doing it. Commercial thinking is very much about the way that you think about what you're buying, the way you are committing the funds that you've got, the services you're buying for your end users, your residents and your clients. And it's making sure that and we did that in the article we wrote the other day, is that you've got £1 and you've got to make it stretch and you've got to make sure you can account for it. Now, There's a completely different way of thinking in terms of the very clever people who can tell you exactly where that pound has gone, and and how it was used and who spent it and how it was authorized. There's accounting techniques and accounting thinking. Commercial thinking is saying, I have a pound, and how can I make the best effort for this? What can I do to ensure that what I need this to do actually happens? So whether that be the actual I'm physically going to buy something, or whether that's actually going to be the additional impact it has when you spend it in terms of social impact, local impact and environmental impact. So I think it's about stopping that from becoming a dirty word and making sure that people understand, like Andrew just said, about the fact that it's something that everybody needs to think about. It's not, commercial thinking is not restrained to the procurement team. It is not restrained to the leaders and senior managers in an organisation. Everybody should be thinking commercially. And in the old days, when we used to do training on this and commercial thinking and procurement, we used to say, treat this like it's your money, but remember that it's not your money. So it's about being careful with it as if it's not your money and accounting for it. But at the same time, think to yourself, would I just spend this money willy-nilly like this and not worry about the outcome and then not watch what happens next? Of course you wouldn't. If it was your money, you'd be really, really sure that that fella you've just paid to fix your roof fixed your roof, and you'd stand by and make sure it was done properly. So that's commercial thinking, bringing it to the workplace and making sure that you're applying it appropriately. It's not evil, it's not profit mongering, it's not capitalism. It's about making the most of the money that you've got for maximum impact for your organisation and the stakeholders. And when I say stakeholders, I don't just mean the people inside, I don't just mean the customers, I also mean your suppliers, because without them, there is no actual delivery for all these things you're spending money on. So you've got to have relationships with them as well. And that's also commercial thinking, relationships with your suppliers. So I think it's trying to make sure that people understand that everyone should be thinking this way. It's not evil, and at the same time, it's wide. It goes right out through your organisation and out the other end.
I'd like to again pick up a point what you said about the supply chain is having their knowledge, again going back to that word of knowledge. They are the ones that will need to deliver what it is that you've requested them to deliver. So again, engaging with your supply chain, you can understand what is deliverable, what is achievable, and also for that pound. Ideally, the pound is going to stay a pound, but you can actually stretch it further. And instead of buying a bronze service, you could potentially buy a silver or gold service, but it's still going to cost you £1. So you're not necessarily making savings, but you're getting more for your pound, which again is commercial thinking and getting away from this constantly, having to make savings. It's actually looking at a different way of enhancing your service and getting more commercially thinking about what that pound can actually deliver. But as I said, the supply chain is the one that will have to deliver and help you make that pound go further, and also be able to buy that gold service, but also them to be able to deliver what it is you require, rather than making a specification that is unachievable. So your supplier is set up to fail from day one, awarding a contract and then 4 years later going to award it again. And you say, so what did you get out of it? What went right? What went wrong? What do we need to change in the specification for you to get what you want out of your next contract? And rather than blank faces, have some lessons learned that we can then use for the next tender, which I don't think actually happens a lot in public sector, which is what we need to drive through again, the commercial thinking element of it, so that we are knowing how our suppliers are performing, rather than at the end of the contract go, they're rubbish. Why were they rubbish? What was the reason behind the rubbish? Where's your comments? Where have you feedback? Where have you worked with the supplier? How have you developed that supplier? And I think that's something that needs to be pushed within our commercial thinking strategy as well, that we are working with our suppliers throughout the term of the contract, not just when it comes to the end and we're re-tendering and we just buy like for like year on year. Because again, any efficiencies or buying that gold service, we're always going to buy bronze, because we don't know if we can buy a gold service, because we've never had innovation within the term of a contract or actually looked at its performance.
I just wanted to also add that I think it's important that we recognise that social housing landlords have a very rich history about thinking about commercial thinking. This isn't something new that we're trying to suggest. You just have to look at the history of social housing to see the innovation and commercial thinking from many social landlords to be able to deliver for their tenants.
But like Rebecca said it before, and it's really important to not forget that that this is not something that is so new that it's not been done before, and that the social landlords are not inept and they've never ever done this. But it's more about bringing it all together, I think, so that they start to recognise that it needs to be more cohesive, and instead of it being split out where you expect commercial thinking either happens by chance, or it's something that people do in the procurement team, or maybe it's a category manager that manages something that's doing it, or maybe one person. Quite often you'll find the finance director will be the person that will have to think that way. So I think that's something that, it's trying to sort of get that sort of mindset. But it's that thing about, at the end of the day, is trying to sort of get that mindset across to say, we're not suggesting that you have to forget that you're public sector or operate differently, but you should be adopting some of the best practice in private sector. So if we talk about the chairman or chief exec of Rolls-Royce, knowing his supply chain intimately and knowing their performance as if that's something that only happens in the private sector, then that's not right. That's actually undermining the money that you're spending and your role. And I don't think that's actually the case. I think you can go into many public sector organisations and they will know these things, but it's whether they know it in a cohesive way, a single strategy which is enabling their organisational strategy, or whether it's just something that happens by chance and sporadically and and in pockets across the organisation. And I think it's just about trying to bring it all together into a single theory or a single sort of strategy to make it work. Because we see amazing procurement processes out there. We see some great examples of contract management out there. We see some amazing knowledge of the markets in organisations. And we see some amazing data in terms of spend and things and performance. We don't necessarily see all of these things joined together in a way that it's planned, and we know exactly what we're doing with it, and it happens consistently. And that's the other thing as well. It's about consistently commercially thinking. You don't just do it every now and then forget about it. And you said before about letting and forgetting. And again, it's another constant sort of plea from us is you can't just do all this stuff, which is amazing, and then sort of let it and walk off. You've got to then manage it through life and make sure you get the benefit from it. So, and we can bring numbers into it. World Commerce and Contracting, formerly known as IACCM, talk about the value you can get from managing a contract could potentially be 9%. It's now 10 to 15%, it's growing, but it could be even higher. But the point is, it's not about saving money. It's not about being evil and penny pinching. It's not about trying to drive a supplier to the ground. And I have seen that happen, where people think they're being really clever by getting a supplier to do it so cheaply they can't operate. It's about potentially not hemorrhaging money out to the private sector unnecessarily. So it's if your money's going to go out there, make sure you're getting something for it, and make sure that it's just the right amount of money to enable them to have a profit and deliver your service to gold standards preferably, but that you're not paying over the odds for it, and you're not wasting money, and you're not having to do things twice, and you're not having to constantly come back and vary the contract or whatever it might be. So I think it's just about thinking about it in a different way. And I actually think it's about thinking about it as if it's your own money. We trained some residents, I'm not sure you remember, there was a housing association we did years ago, and we trained some residents to be doing about what procurement was, and they were doing I think it was a landscape gardening or landscape architect contract, and they were going to do an evaluation within it. And I remember saying to them, imagine you're going to buy something, and I said, what's somebody bought recently? And one of the ladies had bought some trainers for her son. I was like, right, okay, you have bought some trainers. Why did you buy the trainers? What was the requirement? And she said, well, my son needed new trainers because the old ones had fallen apart. Right, okay, so you have a need, and do you know how much money you're going to spend? Yeah, I've got a budget. I've got a budget for that. So right, so you've got a budget and you've got a requirement and you know what you want and you've got an end customer. What do you do next? Do you just go into the first shop, spend all your money in your pocket and come out with whatever the person hands to you? Well, no, I go to multiple shops. I look around, I think about it. He's got to be part of the decision. And this is commercial thinking. And people think it's magic. It's not magic. You do it every day when you go to the shops. So bring your home commercial thinking to work. Apply it in a wider context, and yeah, of course, it's got regulations and legislation and things surrounding it from a public sector perspective, which means you've got to have other people assisting you, procurement professionals, legal professionals, etc. But you're just bringing that commercial thinking that you do every day when you're shopping to work, and applying a different process and different stakeholders. It's actually something that everybody does every day, but all we're trying to do is to help people to integrate it into their strategy so that their organisations think more commercially and make more with their money and do a better job for the public sector or the service that they're providing. So that's really it in a nutshell.
As public sector procurement professionals, we can deliver that. This is what we deliver. We actually look at it from different angles and different ways of thinking, and that's how we then create our processes and our tenders to actually reflect this, so that it's supporting that train of thought, so that you don't just go out and pick one supplier to deliver something and then 2 days later go, oh, there's another one in the market, oh, and there's another one, or they might be able to give me something better, or they might be able to give me something better. So again, it's using that mindset of, let's think of the need, what the outcome is, what it is we need to do to get that outcome, and just think this, I hate using that phrase, outside of the box. But it is true. You have to look at things in a different way and not just go to one shop, pick the first thing that you see and buy it.
The one thing that speaks really clearly about what both you and Andrew have been talking about is this idea of the procurement bell curve. And I know it's something you're very keen on discussing further, Spencer, but this idea that the current commercial thinking within the public sector at large, not just social housing, but is a lot of effort is spent in the middle phase. So just to visualise this curve for anyone listening out there, we have the 3 phases: the pre-procurement phase, the managing procurement, and the contract and supply management. And often I think it's fair to say that what we see is social housing landlords and public sector bodies more generally spending a lot of time in that effort, in the managing tender processes, frameworks, and that tendering activity itself, and then that's where commercial thinking often sits.
Just one thing as well, that bell curve can actually go in a bit of a rainbow back to the start. So your contract management can lead you back into your pre-procurement, because you understand what your contract management has delivered or not, which then puts back into your pre-procurement, which takes you through those stages again. So again, even though the contract management is potentially seen as the last phase, it's actually the start of a new phase, because again, you're thinking, what was good, what was wrong, what can we achieve, what do we need to deliver next time, and put that back into your pre-procurement stage of the process that Rebecca was talking about.
I like the idea of it being a rainbow. It's like getting really colourful now. So, I mean, Rebecca's right. I am obsessed with that bell curve. I think I'm going to have to get a tattoo of it done. My first tattoo needs to be that bell curve, because what we're trying to explain here is that, and I said it before, that procurement teams are not where commercial thinking start and end. And the problem we've got is there's obviously a lot of commercial thinking required in there, and these are the professionals. You know, often you'll find your procurement team are Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply qualified. But what we're saying is, and as Rebecca said, if you put the effort and the concentration into that middle bit, which is really important, of course there's got to be a tender activity, of course there's got to be effort put in there, but if that's where you put all your effort and you don't think about it beforehand and you don't think about it afterwards, then all the effort you put in there is probably going to be wasted, because you're probably going to get ripped off when you go to the market. You might pick the wrong supplier, and then at the end of the day, you're probably not going to get the service you thought you were going to get, and then you find yourself back to square one, wondering why you were busy for 6 to 12 months, and you're not actually any further forward. So you've got to concentrate on flipping that bell curve, so that, if you can imagine it, you are now putting a huge amount of effort, like Rebecca said, into pre-procurement. You're putting a huge amount of effort into managing the thing when it's in life. And that bit in the middle, I'm not saying it's not important, but let's talk about the future in terms of what AI is going to eventually be able to do, and think about how mechanical that middle process is. Of course, it's still going to require humans. Of course, it's going to be, require us to get involved and think about it. But you think about, we already have evaluations and things being done online. It won't be long before computers can, like that thing I read out at the beginning, computers will be able to sit down and take the inputs you gave them with the outputs you want, and probably work through a lot of this by referring to all the regulations and legislation that you need them to, and do most of this thinking for you. And you just need one person working the robots. So if that middle bit is going to go, then you've got to put your effort in the front and the back. And that's a bit of a controversial, maybe a story for another day, is, the future is AI, the future are robots. But you've got to prepare for it now, and you've got to get the thinking right now, because it's not going to be mechanical in the future. It's going to be this intent, this strategic thinking, coupled with your organisational ambitions and goals. So
I think you're absolutely right, Spencer. It is about that strategic thinking, and it's not that procurement activity in the middle isn't important, but that strategic thinking doesn't happen in that middle bit. That strategic thinking has to come at the start, and it has to be that time where you think about what it is that you want to do within your organisation and how you want to drive change, whether that be delivering through your tenants or whether that be making your pound stretch further. And whatever that driving factor is for your organisation, it is about deciding how those decisions influence what you do in that middle phase. But spending your time just on that middle phase, or the majority of that time in that middle phase, doesn't give the opportunity or that space and the headroom to really critically analyse, or even just sit around a table and have a chat about what it is we are trying to do. I think is really important, and if anything in the current climate is more so important.
So, I mean, Shannon was talking before, she was talking before of what questions would you ask if you were starting somebody thinking about this. So here are the questions that we always ask when we have that first initial conversation about commercial thinking. The first question is, do you know how much you spend in the market? So you've got to think, I'm not really that interested in what you're spending on internal services. I mean, I am interested, but that's not really commercial arrangements. It's not really commercial contractual arrangements. So the money you're spending on your pay and the money you're spending on your, on things like finance and things like that, I'm not really that bothered because I can't really influence that. But there are other things that we can help you influence. So how much money are you spending with the private sector? That's the first question. You should know that answer. You should know the answer to the total number, and you should also, and not just the finance director, the senior leadership team and most of the senior managers should know how much you're spending and what you're spending it on broadly in terms of large categories. Question number one. Question number two, who are you spending that with? Who are your top 10 suppliers? You should know who they are. From the chief executive right the way down into the procurement team and all the senior managers, you should know who these top 10 are. The chief exec should certainly know who they are. They should know where the money is going. They should know who it's going to. They should know what the relationship is at this moment in time. They should know what contractual arrangement is in place. They should know how it's performing right now. And if you read Rebecca's amazing article on due diligence, which I'm kind of hoping that you did, because it's brilliant, but what we're saying there as well is you should know the status of that company. So are they okay? Is there something, are they potentially going to go bust? Are they going to continue operating throughout the life of the need of the contract? Because you should know that, and you should be prepared to either help them or to potentially have a contingency plan in place if they fail. Both of those things are valid. I'm not just talking about watching them drop. You could potentially do something. You've got to know your supply chain. You've got to know your top 10 suppliers. You've got to know where your money's going. You've got to know how it's being managed. And those are the basic things in terms of the understanding which enable commercial thinking. That isn't commercial thinking, that's enabling commercial thinking. It's commercial information. It's essential knowledge. So those are the questions we would ask straight away. And then you can start talking about, well, do you have a commercial strategy, and does it enable the organisational strategy? How does it enable the organisational strategy? Because commercial thinking, commercial operations are an enabler. They're not the reason you're here. You are here, as Rebecca said before, with a social purpose. That's why you're here. Commercial thinking will enable you to A, deliver it, and B, deliver it well, like Andrew said before, in terms of the gold sort of plated standard. So those are the first questions we will always ask. Where's your money going? To whom? And is everything okay? And is it all performing the way you want it to? And who's managing it? And is it all enabling your organisation to get where it's supposed to go? First basic questions. And then we can delve into all the exciting detail about, what are the processes and what's your methodology for supply relationship management and contract management and all that exciting stuff. But it starts with those first questions. I hope that those of you who have listened to the podcast found it interesting and stimulating. In the spirit of the great Lieutenant Colombo, I have just one more thing to add. We have discussed our thoughts on what commercial thinking is here today and our opinions on how it should be approached within organisations for maximum benefit based on our experiences, but we recognise that every organisation is different. If this podcast has inspired you to review your commercial strategy or consider how to think differently within your organisation, then we have achieved our mission. If we can help you by having a chat to one or more of you, or coming into your organisation and carrying out a review, or perhaps you even know what you need help with, then please do get in touch. We would love to hear from you.
Thanks all for providing a really great discussion on what commercial thinking is and why it really is so important for organisations to be thinking about. Thank you everyone for listening, and we hope you'll join us next time on the Altair podcasting channel.